Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Reeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too. Hello and welcome to our lovely guest today, Yvonne Fuchs. Hi Yvonne.
Hello.
Right, it's lovely to connect with you today, and I've got a little bio here that I'd just like to introduce Yvonne with. So Yvonne Fuchs is a textile designer, educator and mentor to many in the creative industries. Yvonne has spent 40 years in textiles as a teacher from adult education through to master's degree level. And she has also been working as an artist as well in the community for a number of years. And let's not forget her design experience and that of business coach and mentor to other creatives. Another interesting fact is that Yvonne is also an ordained member of a Zen order teaching meditation and has practiced mindfulness for over 20 years. So Yvonne has brought her worlds together and provides her slow stitch courses with a focus on mindful and contemplative textile art. And it's also worth mentioning that Yvonne is also the founder of the Whitstable Textile Society and has many connections with the lovely members of the Profanity Embroidery Group. And it was their podcast episode which connected me and Yvonne together for our chat today. So one of those lovely connections. So welcome again, Yvonne.
Yeah, it's a great connection.
Fantastic. So before we get started in great detail with your Stitchery story today, would you like to share with us what you're working on, Yvonne, and what has got you excited?
Well, I've just been on the most amazing trip in Central America. I've been in Costa Rica and in Mexico. And if any of your listeners have been to these parts of the world, you're in the tropics and you're in the place of the most amazing folk art.
Yes.
So I went along to see the rainforest and the cloud forest, and of course couldn't stop drawing the whole time because it's so inspirational. And then I went to see some friends who live in a very, very quiet part of Mexico, full of craft and full of handwork. And so what I'm starting to work on are some very quiet, contemplative pieces, bringing together this folk art style that you find in Mexico with the most beautiful vegetation and flowers that you find in Costa Rica.
Oh, well, that's a lovely combination. I haven't been to those two places. I've been to Belize. I was actually going to go and live there, but that's another story. And when I also spent time in Peru as well, and I love the textiles in Peru. So,
oh yeah,
yes,
both incredible places.
Oh.
Yeah. And they're great embroiderers, the Mexicans. I had a wonderful moment with sign language, half Italian and half Spanish, with a load of lovely ladies sitting on the pavement embroidering cushions. And I was showing them my embroidery, and they were just all kissing and hugging me because I think they don't think that other people do what they do. Mine looks very different to theirs, but I went and bought loads of threads from their little shop. And it was just the most wonderful connection. And I've always been a world traveller. So wherever I go, I take my stitching with me and nearly always strike up a conversation with some usually lovely ladies and often elderly ladies. So it was just a joy.
Yes, it is joyful, isn't it, when you can share something? Quite often we may not be able to share the exact words, but we are sharing our work. And as you say, we look at the world from a different viewpoint in that we've got access to everything through the internet and so on. But some of these other communities, especially some of the older ladies, they just don't. And as you say, they're probably wondering, well, does anybody else do this as well? But that's a really interesting point. That thank you for sharing your excitement. So, have you got anything else that you're kind of working on that you're excited about?
Well, of course, I'm sure we're going to talk about it soon on this podcast, but in a couple of weeks, a bit longer, maybe 3 weeks, I'm starting a new slow stitch course here in Whitstable. And I always spend a lot of time reflecting on what I'm going to teach, how am I going to teach it. Yes, it's a course where it's progressive and I teach lots and lots of techniques, but it's much deeper than that because I want to bring experience to these people. So I do spend quite a lot of time in quiet reflection, you could say, in meditation, thinking about, well, how am I going to teach this course? And what do I want to bring and what do I want to say? And it, you know, I take these things very seriously. So yeah, I'm spending a bit of time doing that at the moment.
Right. And while I remember, because I hadn't, is there's lots of places where we can find out about Yvonne and her work and the various hats that she wears. But probably the best place would be on the Stitchery Stories website, there'll be an episode there for Yvonne with all the various links on. But one place in particular, very relevant to our conversation, is that there is the Slow Stitch community, and that's on Facebook, isn't it, Yvonne?
That is Slow Stitch community. It's a page on Facebook, and if you get involved with us in more depth, we have closed groups for all the groups that I teach. But also, if you want to find out about what's going on in Whitstable, we have the Facebook page, which is the Whitstable Textile Society. It's a closed group, but as soon as you apply to join, you can join. And if you're doing anything exciting yourself in textiles, you want to tell us in Whitstable about it, we'd love to hear from you. So we use Facebook because it seems a way to get to the most people all over the place. And we've got members from all over the world who just like to see what we're up to.
I'm in the Embroidery Skills and I'm the secretary of the Hull branch, and we've got a Facebook page that I run, although I have to say I haven't put much on there recently. And the same thing, I think we've got more members not in Hull. We've got somebody in San Diego and all over, which is like really, really quite fascinating. So anyway, those are two really great places the way you can connect with Yvonne and find out, you know, more about the slow stitch that we'll be talking about a bit more about today. So how did you actually get interested, Yvonne, in embroidery and textile art? God, what sort of things did you do? And then possibly to bring that directly to what we're talking about today, the impact of this slow stitch movement.
Well, I suppose I could almost say I was born with a needle in my hand. Mm-hmm. My grandmother, who was Italian, lived in our house. And I think probably before I could write, she taught me to sew. So she just taught me a running stitch on a little, you know, ring.
Yes.
And she came from, as we were talking about ladies, elderly ladies sitting outside their front doorstep doing stuff. That was probably my nonna, as you would call her.
Yes.
And so my nonna, she had this thing that if a woman couldn't sew and couldn't cook, you weren't going to make a good wife. No. Because that was what was important to Italian ladies of a certain age.
Yes.
And so she taught me to stitch, and I loved my nonna. My nonna was my number one fan. She loved me, I loved her, and the best thing to do, because she didn't speak very good English, just to sit and stitch with her.
Yes.
So that's how I got into stitching, and I love all the textile worlds. I started in fine art. I was making big installation textiles, big woven pieces and things in the 70s when I was in the art school. I had a textile design business designing coloration. I worked for my father's cashmere company as a designer, yarn designer and colorist. So I've always had thread in my life as well.
Yes, it literally does run through your life as a thread.
It runs through. And funnily enough, when I look back, I sort of would say, if you looked at if those of your listeners would do embroidery or do canvas work, if you look at the back of a piece of canvas work or embroidery, it's not usually quite the same as the front. Mm-hmm. It's the interesting bit. And that's probably what my life looks like. Lots of knots, lots of things that didn't quite work, and then lots of beautiful patterns. And that's probably how textiles are in my life. I love to sew, I love to knit, crochet. But stitching has sort of come to a little bit of prominence in the last few years. And I suppose I didn't really realise there was a slow stitch movement. I just loved stitching, and I, of course, loved to do meditation.
Right.
And it sort of happened that I thought, when I stitch, I become very calm. In fact, I always say to everybody who asks me, they say to me, what's the best way to relax? I said, well, learn to meditate is great, but actually, if you stitch without a big intention and with mindfulness and with concentration and with presence, you will relax. And that is what I do to relax. I sit and make very simple stitches, running stitches on cloth, without a big pattern and without a big intention. But I let things appear to me. And that's sort of how the two worlds come together.
Oh, right. And that's interesting, just going back before I forget, to the thing about your life feels like the back of an embroidery full of knots and lines and all the rest of it. And I thought, what a wonderful way to describe things, because do you know what? I feel exactly the same. So, yeah, we come across some knots every now and again, don't we? I know I'm a so-and-so for putting knots on my embroidery, and I know I shouldn't, but I know. Just this dreadful habit.
Knots are beautiful, and in fact, it was the knots. I'd had quite a tricky life. There'd been things that didn't work out, and things that I'd been very sick. All sorts of things happened, and what I found was I needed to deal with that and my mental health, because when tragic things happen and difficult things happen, it causes stuff to happen to you. So one of the ways that I came into meditation was I wanted to find a way to still myself and to find a center and to be calm. And, that's a technique I learned. I'm very interested in world religions. As I said, I'm a great traveler, so you're always coming across people's religions. So it's interesting how when you look back, I'm 62 now, and I'm looking back and thinking, goodness gracious, isn't that an interesting pattern, how all that lot came together?
It absolutely is, and it is a pattern, and it was the same kind of thing. And I've spent my life in IT. I started off in the Nissan car factory in the Northeast as a mainframe programmer, but I've always had the creative side of me going on in parallel to the Mrs. Technical side. But for a long time, I kind of almost pretended I didn't do embroidery, because you don't talk about embroidery at car factories full of men going on about computers and stuff, so you kind of almost suppress it. But even now, when I work for myself, so I don't have that frenetic, stressful kind of working life anymore. But after a day of staring at computer screens and scratching my head about it's online marketing and podcasting I do now, it is lovely to still pick up my embroidery, and I do more and more now as well. And it's that slow concentrating on what you're doing. You can forget about everything else and just focus on
absolutely
that thing. So,
and I'm beginning to think I ought to think about going to the NHS and going, never mind all these tablets you give people, yes. Give me a set of people and I'm going to teach them how to do stitching slowly. I know that people have come to my courses, and I've run many all over the country, who've said to me, you've really helped me with my illness. Or I've had people at the end of their life coming to stitch with me. I used to work in a hospice, and I realized that actually there's something very beautiful about doing things quietly and with care and enjoying that. And, I'll describe a little bit of how a slow stitch course runs so that your listeners can understand what we do.
That would be interesting.
There is something very, very beautiful about it. And a lot of people say it has helped them with their problems, helps them to give clarity, helps them to become calm. And you still make beautiful work.
It's the sort of thing where you think, well, really, it's rather obvious, isn't it? It's one of those things that's so simple. You think, well, why don't we really know about this a bit more? But yeah, I think there is so many stresses in all sorts of aspects of our lives these days that it is really nice to be able to sit down, stop, and do something else. So we normally kind of chat about favourite techniques. So let's look at the techniques that are involved with slow stitching. That would seem to work, wouldn't it? So would you like to tell us a bit? Yeah, go and kind of explain a bit more about the slow stitching and your classes, and how you actually use the slow stitching to help people to kind of stay calm.
Well, there are lots of strands to this, to coin a phrase, and the slow food movement started a number of years ago, and it was about being authentic and going back to the roots of food and going back to the land and going back to simplicity. And there are lots of wonderful books. There's a beautiful book that we look at on the course called Slow Stitch, and I think it's Claire Wellesley. I'm just not got it in front of me at the moment. And that's a phrase that has been used, but I was using that phrase before I saw the book. And when I saw the book, I thought, oh, that's brilliant. And I changed the word slow because one of the things that I understand about meditation is that the easiest way when you're stressed, often if you're in the doctors, they say, take a few deep breaths. Or if I've just been to my physio this morning, and she said, take a deep breath in, Yvonne, while she sticks a great big needle into my knee to give me some acupuncture. And what that does is that as you breathe in and out, it calms your nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. And so when you meditate, one of the techniques to meditate is to watch your breath and just focus on your breath, the in-breath and the out-breath. And if you do that for a few minutes, you find everything calms down. So one of the fundamental things that I have brought to my version of Slow Stitch is teaching people to connect to their breath while they stitch. So the big technique that we have is a running stitch.
Yeah.
So everybody can do it. This is not about being an embroiderer. This is about being a stitcher. And we also take a lot of reference from Japanese borrow. Now, I went on the most amazing trip to Japan a few years ago, and I've also had many Japanese friends within the textile world over the years. And I've always been fascinated by this mending technique called borrow. And borrow was a technique used by the poor farming community in Japan to mend their clothes. Right. And they would, because cloth was so expensive, and often they had to make their own cloth from hemp, that they couldn't afford to buy a new thing. They had to chop up everything and stitch it to itself so that they could patch their clothes.
Right.
And so the borrow techniques that you find in Japan inform this way of doing things. So in my Slow Stitch, what we do is we work with recycled materials as much as possible. Partly because they've got the most wonderful patina of age, but also because I like people to make pieces that are very personal. So if you think about how American quilts really came to be made, they were made because people were so poor that their children didn't have clothes to wear, and they'd make one big quilt and put all the children underneath it so that they had something to keep them warm.
Yes.
And so this idea of patching, reusing, and of course in Japanese thinking, cloth always is inhabited by the owner, the person who has had that piece of cloth or worn it. Right. Also links very much to Zen Buddhism, but that's another story. So we like to work with cloth that's meaningful to people, cloth that is old, so we don't keep buying new things. We like to use very simple stitch techniques, like running stitches, and we like to relate it to Japanese borrow.
Right, that's really, I'm really pleased that you've explained that, because that really shows a very different emphasis on what you would imagine.
Yeah.
And bringing in those aspects of culture and the reuse of materials. Yes. Sounds absolutely fascinating. I wish I was a bit closer.
Yeah, well, we'll have to come to Hull. Shall I come to Hull and run one for you? I could do a weekend, you see. I love this so much that I will travel anywhere to do borrow and slow stitch. But let me just give you one other technique, which I think is really important. In the slow stitch that I run, we stitch in silence for quite a lot of the time.
Now that is interesting.
Now this is very interesting, isn't it? Because having been a textile teacher for most of my life, my adult life, what we love when we get together in textiles is to have a cup of tea and a piece of cake, don't we?
Exactly, and a right good old chin wag.
Would not happen without those two ingredients. Yes. But what I find is if there's too much chatting, you do not connect with the piece of work that you are doing. So I will give an introduction for a while. I will show lots of techniques. We will share materials. Often we share things that we've got together because it's a lovely sort of way of doing things. And then I have a beautiful Buddhist bell that came from Bhutan. And I ring this bell. And then we have 25 minutes in silence. Then we'll go for the tea and cake. Then we'll do another 25 minutes in silence, and then we finish by talking about what we're doing, whatever. And it's really interesting because everybody, when I ask students at the end, what was the best thing about this course, they all go, oh, we love working in silence. And so, you know, when I go and visit groups that I've started or been a part of or whatever, they go, have you got your bell, Yvonne? Should we do some silent stitching? And what happens is there is a sense of deep connection between everyone stitching. And I can't put my finger on it, but it's the most beautiful feeling of people stitching together. And it's not only women stitching, often, you know, not always, but I think on this course I will have some men. But it's not always just women. Sometimes women and men. Sometimes it's younger women coming with their mums. But there is a great communal feeling just stitching in silence.
Yeah. Now, our Embroidery Skills branch, we're only small, there's about 10 of us. And so, you know, there usually is quite a bit of chat because we're all sat around a table and we're all kind of chatting in one big kind of conversation. But sometimes if we're all like, oh, we've got to get something finished, or I don't know, just sometimes the conversation just stops, doesn't it? And you're all really concentrating on what you're doing. And then there's always somebody who feels like, oh, nobody's saying anything. We all notice nobody's saying anything. And then somebody has to like kind of crack almost. You know what I mean? Oh, no, we've got to talk again.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do concentrate a lot more as well, I think, when you're not chatting. So it's an interesting combination, that. So brilliant.
And it's not really so much concentration that we're working with. It's what I call being aware. It's being aware of how the thread feels on the needle in your hand, how it feels as you take it through different types of material, how you connect to your body, you know, how are you sitting? Do you feel comfortable? So it's what I call bringing your complete presence. So becoming very, very present to what you're doing. And it is an unbelievable experience, you know, and if any of your listeners are just, you know, thinking, oh, that sounds quite nice. I just challenge everybody just to make stitches in a piece of cloth without thinking about, I'm now embroidering a flower. I am now making a tea cozy. Just let the stitch live and do what it wants to do. And I think a lot of my very experienced textile designers who came on the last course said to me that was a complete revelation to them, to work without a plan. Because what happens is that you evolve a plan. In fact, it's almost the fabric talks to you. Like Michelangelo said, he let the marble speak to him. And Kandinsky said, let the line go for a walk. And it's the same in our form of stitching.
Yes. Now, one thing that people will often get you to do is when you're writing, so, you know, especially when you're kind of journaling or trying to just clear something out of your head, and I do it myself, you'd sit there with your pen and your paper. It has to be a pen or a pencil anyway, but not a type keyboard, and let your pen write, and just keep on writing. And it's like, what has your pen had to say for itself? It's quite surprising what comes out of just using your pen and just
writing absolutely
about anything. And so this is the equivalent of doing that. Just let your needle thread.
I never thought of it like that, but that is absolutely right. It is.
So in terms of the career and you know, many years of experience you've got with all of this, Yvonne, what would you say, or how would you say that this fits in with everything else? Is this something that you feel as if you've been working for a long time to pull this together? It's almost like the pinnacle in some respects of your meditation and your traveling and your textiles.
I think it's very interesting. I mean, you know, I was just reflecting that, you know, I'm 62 now, and I started designing for money, shall we say, as a commercial designer when I was 20. And when you're young, a lot of it's about your career and you're rushing about and you're trying to get the work in. And then I, you know, I had more small children, and I had to get a sort of more of a different type of job. I'd had a knitwear business, and so I had lots of employees then, and then I started teaching, and it was rush, and you know, and getting experience and learning techniques and selling stuff, and bing, 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 bing. When I hit 50, I decided to move to the countryside. Well, actually, I wanted to move to the seaside. So 12 years ago, I moved here to Whitstable. And, I'm a Mancunian. I'd been living in the South because that was the place that I could get the most work. I used to travel a lot with my work. I used to go to New York a lot, sell work in the USA. I used to go to Italy a lot, selling work in Italy and in Florence. But when I sort of came to live by the sea, it allowed me to breathe more easily, and I started to slow down. Now, I'm never going to slow completely down, even though I've got a gammy leg and I've got to have a knee operation. But it allowed me to reflect a lot more. And at that point, I'd been learning meditation, meditating in a group, being part of a Zen Buddhist group, loving, being sort of involved with that. But this thing of textiles just is in me. So what was I going to do? It was bound to come together, I felt.
Yes.
And it's really lovely when, if you can bring your great loves together, you can allow those loves to show you something. And because I love sharing with people, I think everybody tells me I'm a natural teacher. I've just got so much passion for things that I just like to show people. And people are always asking me, what are you working on? What are you doing? What are you making? And so I thought, well, I'm doing this little stitch piece. And somebody said to me, oh, that's really interesting, Yvonne. That's an unusual technique. And I thought, oh, I suppose it is. I love natural dyes, I love to dye in indigo. And I've been dyeing some indigo. And suddenly it sort of came to me that actually, as I get older, I appreciate the skills that I have. I appreciate the fact that I've, been able to design commercially. I help lots and lots and lots of lovely designers and people in textiles and fashion develop their businesses. So I help them with their own work and selling it. So I know I've got those techniques and skills, but I've also got this just love of creating. So it is as if the older I get, the more I want to stop and make things. Not for any big exhibition thing, although I think our slow stitchers in Whitstable are going to have a show next year. And, that's going to be really exciting. But because I think as you get older, I hope we become more reflective. And I just like the stillness of it. And I think as I get older, I like being stiller. So I'm sitting here looking out of the window and I'm surrounded by trees, and I can see at the other side of the trees there's going to be the sea. And it's a lovely thing to connect with nature. I think I'm probably a very keen gardener. I love nature. And I think all these things seem to be somehow appearing all together. So I think it's a bit, I run a number of, two different feeds on Instagram. And I put a little feed up the other day. I put a little post up on one of the feeds, which is called the Zen of Business, actually. And I said, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think we stand on our own shoulders of our own giants, probably as we get older. We suddenly see all these wonderful things we've done, and we sort of want to bring them together in some way. That seems to be what's happening. And that's what seems to be happening to other people I know of my age. Yes. That's not too waffly.
No, because, I'm 52, so I'm 10 years younger than you, but I've moved to the sea, and there's lots of things starting to come together for me that I never appreciate. Like I say, I've worked in IT for all those years, but yet now there's IT skills plus my hobby of embroidery and textile art, plus me earning my living online, helping people with podcasts and online marketing has all come together. And
I think that's brilliant.
And I've created this podcast.
I loved it when we first engaged in email. I thought, what a brilliant combination. I really like that. I absolutely did.
And I think that's what we appreciate, isn't it? We start to appreciate the little pieces of us are all starting to come together in ways that we never expected. So
absolutely. And I think it's also this thing. One of the phrases we use in Zen Buddhism is called kindfulness. And that's sort of a mixture between, if you have ever seen the Dalai Lama, he often says, my religion is kindness. The thing about the Buddha is he doesn't, it's not about being God, it's all about loving your human family, and compassion is at the center of it. But one of the places we have to show compassion is to ourselves. And so mindfulness is being kind to yourself and aware of yourself. And one of the kindful things you can do for yourself is to appreciate maybe the tapestry of your life, some of the difficulties of it, but how you've managed to overcome them. And sometimes that becomes a theme for people's work.
Yes.
And you can embroider, or you can make slow stitch, which may be very abstract. A lot of what we do in slow stitch is not narrative, it's quite abstract.
Yeah.
And that could be a piece about, your life. And what is really lovely about the slow stitch groups that I have created is that people become very honest with each other and themselves when they're stitching. And we hear some great stories in the time that we do speak. And some of the work that is made is quite personal and unbelievably beautiful.
Yeah. Now, we normally have a kind of a bit of a laugh about unfinished objects and things not going quite right, but those don't seem to really apply in the...
they do apply. I've got plenty of unfinished objects. But in a way that actually I would like to talk about that, because actually unfinished things are really very much slow stitch, because things might come to an end. You might have stitched something and you go, well, I don't know what to do with that now. I'll just put it down.
Yeah.
Which is really good. And then in a while, you might be making another piece, and suddenly you remember that piece that you left, and then you incorporate it, and that's very slow stitch, and that is really beautiful. And I think the other thing I'd like to say about things that go wrong, which are quite interesting, is that a lot of our slow stitchers love working with natural dyes. And one of the group this last time was working using the found leaves and things from a local area, a little snicket, we would say down here.
Yeah.
Or certainly we'd say that in the north, wouldn't we?
Yeah, snicket's a northern word, yeah.
All interesting greenery. And I remember her ringing up to say to me, oh, Yvonne, I've boiled all this stuff up, and then I've put the mordant on, and I've done this. And she said, oh my goodness, my house smells now like my husband's coming home soon, and my husband goes in, why are you witches brewing up in that kitchen? So you can get quite witchy if you want to in slow stitch. But one of the great things about it is that natural dyes give the most amazing resonance of colour, completely different to a bought dye, and that can really inform your stitch work. And I love to dye things naturally, and they have a real sense of place when you do that. So they're sort of not quite that go wrong, but with natural dyeing, you can't actually predict what is going to happen.
No.
You can give a general idea, but it might come out very, very strange in the end. So that's quite fun. And it is actually tremendous fun and very, very experimental.
Yeah. Well, those are two very interesting answers combined with the thing about when things didn't go right and UFOs. And I think that's possibly a good way to look at some of the UFOs. Lots of people have said, well, some of the things I've done and I've just put it to one side, and then, literally they have come back at some point and then chopped something up or tried again or done something else with it. Yeah, so it's
and some of my students would tell you that I say, well, if we don't like the colour, let's dip it in tea.
Yeah.
That'll be in tea. Or let's put some indigo on that. Or let's boil that up with some avocado stones and see if we can get that. And, nothing is ever lost, I think. You should cherish it and go, let's keep that in the box of unfinished objects and let's just wait and see when we need them.
Yeah, and I think different styles lend themselves differently, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
To those things. I think, again, if we've got this definite pattern or design in our head and it's going to be this, that and the other, and if it doesn't go right, then we can kind of tell that flower doesn't look like what we thought it was going to be. So I think it's a bit more challenging to try and do something else with it, isn't it? Maybe some techniques are going to be more open to be reused. And so
you'd be amazed what you can do with something. Although I have bags and bags and bags of fabrics which I take to my classes, and sometimes, and I remember saying to one of my students, this is a pair of very expensive trousers that I put in the washing machine by mistake, and look what's happened to them. They've become felt. And it set off a whole new fabulous project for that person. So you never know. Even the great disasters in the washing machine can be used.
That's so true, yes. And I think we've all got a bit carried away with jumpers, haven't we? And finished up with this mangled, shrunken thing. But yeah, cut it up, do something nice with it. It'll be a nice texture. And felting's in anyway, isn't it? So
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Yvonne, it's so interesting, just giving us a glimpse there into, specifically out of all your many hats, the slow stitching one. So just in kind of general terms, I usually like to poke around with this question a bit. Have you heard of the phrase about long distant elephants? Managing these long-term projects where you agree to do things and then it's such a long way away. Then all of a sudden it's looming large and you've kind of got a panic on your hands. So how does your approach to keeping all of your different projects and things on the go, how does that fit in with keeping them going, but also this kind of mindful, slow stitching aspect as well? How does that work?
Well, I think, I used to in my youth be a great multitasker and run around and have 24 hats on and juggling plates. And of course, as I got more into mindfulness, I realized that actually that's not going to help my mental health at all. So yes. I've sort of become a monotasker now. Right. Do one thing, complete it and move on to the next. Now, that's in real life, that doesn't really work all the time. But I think there was a great management consultant many years ago called Steve Covey, and he wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly
Yes, him, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And one of his habits was start with the end in mind, so have a little plan, and then do first things first. And I think I do like to have a little program of things that I'm going to do. If I'm planning a course, I know when it's going to start, what I've got to do, But I also love doing things just one at a time so I can really be focused on it. And I think if you're present to that while you're doing it, that's a really lovely way to do it. And then things don't tend to get quite out of hand and you don't get so panicky.
Yes. Oh, well, I think that's a really good approach, yes. And his book's a classic, isn't it?
It is such a classic.
It is, absolutely. So is it the 7 traits of effective people or something like that?
I think it's that 7 habits of highly effective
that's
people.
It, yeah.
I mean, it's probably 30 years old now, but it's still it's a great business read for those the stitchers who are still in management. And
absolutely, yeah.
I had to use it when I was managing textile departments often.
Yes. Brilliant. So there we are. As ever, I could talk with you all day about these sorts of things. So we're coming up to our time. So really, Yvonne, it's been just really wonderful finding out about slow stitching particularly. And now you did say that you're running a course fairly shortly. Is there
right.
Basis on that? Would anybody be able to get
There are a few spaces left. It's not a big group. We meet in Whitstable. It starts on the 8th of April in our little art centre. And there is an Eventbrite link. I think we're going to put it onto the website.
Yes, I'll put that onto the Stitchery.
But I really would like to say to listeners that if people want to learn this technique, do get in touch with me, because I have a real passion for this. And if I can fit it in and I can come and see you, I love to run a day course or a weekend course for people. And, if you've got a little group, an embroidery group, a textile group, I think you'll find that this way of working will really inform your other work.
Yeah, well, it's been really great just getting an insight into that little window, and a slightly different episode for us today as well, focusing on possibly an approach rather than specific pieces of work. So I hope everybody is kind of has enjoyed this and has opened their minds to different approaches around stitch on top of all the beautiful things that we all like to create. So thank you very much, Yvonne, for spending time with us today, explaining all of that. And so people can follow you on the various places of the different links. And yes, I think it certainly made me think about stitching in a different way and how our life follows our threads and patterns as well. So really interesting. Thank you so much, Yvonne. I've certainly enjoyed it.
Thanks very much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you.
It's been a pleasure. If you liked this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and offers from our lovely guests. Please visit stitcherystories.com to join the fan club. Of course, if you have iTunes, then subscribe there to automatically get new episodes, and why not leave us a review and rating whilst you are there. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. So keep stitching, keep smiling, and keep creating your very own Stitchery stories.